He was a giant among men, quite literally. With a swing of his axe, he split mountains. With a single step, he carved out valleys. Paul Bunyan, the towering lumberjack of American folklore, wasn't just a legend. He was a national icon. Every child heard the tales. Every logging town raised a statue. But what if the story you grew up with wasn't folklore at all, but fabrication? What if Paul Bunyan never existed and was never supposed to? Before we unravel the truth, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us uncover the real stories behind the myths. Because behind the flannel and folklore lies something deeper. A story not about strength but control. Not about courage, but commerce. What started as campfire humor among loggers was twisted into something bigger. A tool of industry, of cultural erasure, and of environmental silence. Paul Bunyan may not have walked among us, but his shadow shaped a nation. Let's begin with the myth, the cheerful story we were all told. But as we'll soon discover, even legends built on laughter can hide devastating truths. No heartland of America, where pine forests stretched to the edge of the sky and steam rose from the mouths of oxen on frostbitten mornings, the name Paul Bunyan rang like thunder through generations. He was a lumberjack of lumberjacks, a giant with stride that shaped valleys, and an axe swing that split entire forests in one stroke. His companion, Babe the Blue Ox, matched his size and loyalty, together forming a duo that reshaped the American wilderness in tales passed down around campfires and school classrooms. Children were taught to admire Bunyan's strength and cheer for his colossal feats, believing his footprints created the Great Lakes and that his flannel shirt warmed the north wind. The legend painted Paul as not just a worker of the land, but a gentle giant, kind, noble, and oddly domestic for a man who wrestled storms and chopped mountains. He built homes with one hand while feeding entire camps with the other, embodying both mythic strength and homespun American values. Whether it was racing against steam-powered saws or herding hurricanes like cattle, Paul always emerged a humble hero. In an era that celebrated expansion, hard work, and taming the wild, he was the perfect symbol, strong, pure-hearted, and endlessly brave. But here's the catch. This story didn't arise out of nowhere. While it feels timeless, like something carved into the bark of every tree in the Northwoods, Paul Bunyan's origin wasn't oral. Folklore passed from grandparents to grandchildren. Instead, his story was packaged, told and retold not by grandmothers, but by advertisements and pamphlets. The friendly giant who shaped the land might not have been born from legend at all, but from a printing press. Yet before peeling back that layer, it's crucial to sit in the warmth of the story we all think we know. Many Americans have nostalgic memories tied to Paul. School plays, tall tale books, roadside statues. Entire festivals still celebrate his feats. The story is sticky, too charming to question, too familiar to doubt. The myth offers comfort. A man who could conquer nature but never lost his heart. That comfort is exactly why this version of Paul lasted so long. But was it really ever folklore or something else masquerading as it? And if the myth was shaped by outside hands, what was their goal? As we step deeper into the forest of history, the trail becomes foggy. What if Paul wasn't a legend passed through time, but a tool crafted in a very specific era, to serve a purpose far from innocent? What if the giant wasn't real and was never meant to be? While the myth of Paul Bunyan echoes like ancient folklore, his documented birth is surprisingly recent. The earliest printed reference to Bunyan wasn't a dusty folktale from settlers or pioneers. It was an article published in the Duluth News Tribune in 1904. Not a story whispered in log cabins, but a stylized tale crafted for a newspaper audience. That alone reshapes our assumptions. But the real twist? Just a decade later, a Minnesota-based lumber company, Red River Lumber Company, seized the opportunity to turn Paul into a walking, talking marketing campaign. They didn't just repeat the story. They reinvented him entirely. Red River Lumber knew exactly what they were doing. In an age of rapid industrial expansion and environmental conquest, Bunyan was the perfect face for American productivity. They printed booklets showing Paul clearing forests faster than any machine, smiling as he turned wildland into timber. These weren't just fun stories. They were tools, aimed at workers, clients, and children, to celebrate and justify the logging industry. His size was no longer metaphorical. It was strategic, a symbol of man's dominance over nature, stylized in checkered flannel and folksy charm. The myth was no longer just a tale. It was a brand, and the brand grew. Schools adopted Bunyan's stories into curriculum. Roadside attractions popped up across logging towns, each trying to outdo the other with taller statues and bluer oxen. A cultural competition fueled by commerce, not tradition. Every retelling made Paul bigger, kinder, more heroic. But behind the friendly face was a very modern motive, normalization. As America chopped its way westward, Bunyan made it all feel noble. Children laughed at his antics while entire forests vanished. Few questioned whether the hero they adored had been manufactured with the same precision as the lumber he represented. In this light, Paul Bunyan becomes more than a story. He becomes a mask, a carefully designed distraction from the brutal realities of environmental exploitation and displacement. The folklore disguised a far more aggressive truth, that the myth of man mastering nature was necessary to justify the damage being done. And Bunyan, with his axe and ox, was a smiling poster child of that myth. So was he ever real in spirit? Or was he always industrial smoke and mirrors? And just as we think we've seen through the illusion, another question emerges. If Paul was a fabrication, what about the world he overshadowed? Who were the real people and cultures erased in favor of his towering silhouette? The earliest whispers of Paul Bunyan, before corporate printers polished him, describe not a gentle titan, but a rough, exaggerated parody of the average lumberjack. In oral traditions shared in bunkhouses of French-Canadian loggers, Bon Jean, Good John, was a sarcastic exaggeration of real men who endured brutal winters, crippling labor and isolation. He wasn't a giant. He was one of them. The tall tales were their escape, their therapy. When Paul grew 10 feet tall, it was metaphor, not mythology. He stumbled through absurd situations because life in the woods was absurd. The pain was real. The jokes were survival. But when Red River and later publishers got hold of these tales, they scrubbed them clean. The sarcasm was lost. The struggles erased. The crude humor, the curses, the sadness of real loggers facing frostbite and economic despair, replaced with family-friendly heroics. Paul became sanitized, marketable, safe. The laughter that once held pain was now converted into brochure-worthy slogans. The transformation was so complete that future generations didn't just forget the original Paul. They were never told he existed. Even Babe the Blue Ox, likely a late invention to add whimsy, became central to a version built more for classrooms and campsites. The deeper betrayal wasn't just in the editing. It was in the erasure. Paul Bunyan's revised story took up so much space that it crowded out real histories. Indigenous voices that warned of overlogging, local legends with deeper roots and darker meanings. The myth didn't just distract, it silenced. Native American stories of the forest were painted over by flannel and folklore. The woods, once sacred, became Paul's playground. His tales encouraged domination, not reverence. Behind the laughter lurked conquest. And beneath that, something colder, the deliberate removal of memory. Some historians even suggest that Paul's myth was intentionally bloated to serve nationalistic pride. As America sought to define its cultural heroes, it wanted a figure who wasn't ancient or foreign, someone rugged, masculine, and homegrown. Paul fit the bill perfectly. But what if he was crafted not to honor the past, but to rewrite it? What if the biggest lie wasn't that Paul existed, but that he was ever meant to inspire? And as we stare up at this wooden statue towering in logging towns, we're left wondering, did the myth grow so big that it crushed the truth beneath its boots? Paul Bunyan's towering axe, once seen as a badge of strength, becomes a chilling symbol when reframed. It is no longer the heroic tool of progress. It is the weapon of conquest. Swing after swing, forest after forest, his blade wasn't just clearing land. It was severing ties between people and nature, carving into the spiritual fabric of the continent. In this light, Babe the Blue Ox becomes more than a whimsical companion. With his massive hooves stomping valleys into the earth, he represents unchecked force, a beast of burden for an empire that didn't know when to stop expanding. Their journey was not adventure. It was domination wrapped in myth. Every feat in Bunyan's tale, once celebrated as magical, now reveals darker undertones. He creates rivers by dragging his axe. He levels mountains to build roads. He wins against machines in contests of destruction. But what kind of hero competes to see who can tear down more? Each of these feats, when isolated, reads like satire, a grotesque glorification of environmental collapse. Paul didn't tame the land. He erased it. And while the stories laughed, the trees fell in silence. The silence is important, because it's not just a land that goes quiet, but also the voices that once warned against its abuse. There is deep psychology embedded here. Paul Bunyan embodies the idealized man of early industrial America, physically massive, emotionally vacant, endlessly productive. He doesn't weep, doesn't question. He just moves forward. In this, he becomes an icon of repressed emotion and violent growth. His silence is the silence of men told not to feel. His path to the forest is a path of a culture taught to value production over preservation, domination over coexistence. And the laughter that follows him? That's the nervous laughter of society, unsure whether it created a hero or a monster. Babe, too, may carry more than muscle. The blue ox, impossible and surreal, suggests something deeply broken beneath the myth. Why blue? Why animal? In psychological terms, Babe could represent the emotional burden Paul cannot speak, a massive, loyal creature that drags behind him the grief and consequences of his own actions. He cannot abandon Babe, nor can he stop moving forward. In the surreal bond between man and beast, we see guilt made flesh. The past can't be erased, but in Paul's story, it is forced to follow, silent and heavy. And so we are left with a question more haunting than whether Paul Bunyan existed. What kind of culture needs to invent a man like him? Paul Bunyan never walked among us, yet his shadow stretches across American history. Though fictional, he became more influential than many real men. That's the paradox. His story, built on erasure and exaggeration, survives because it serves, because it tells a nation what it wants to hear. That giants carved out the world with laughter. That nature was made to be conquered. That destruction could be funny, and silence could mean approval. But myths, when repeated long enough, begin to shape identity. And Paul Bunyan didn't just clear forests. He cleared space in our cultural memory, leaving little room for the voices that once lived there. Even now, his legacy lingers in ways we barely notice. He lives in how we praise productivity over preservation, in how we teach children to idolize strength without context, in how we flatten stories into digestible, heroic archetypes, without asking who gets flattened in the process. Roadside statues still smile, towering above visitors who rarely question what's missing. Logging towns still bear his name like a badge of honor. But beneath the folklore lies a map of choices. Who we remember, who we forget, and why. Perhaps Paul Bunyan was never about a man at all. Perhaps he was about an idea, an ideal, sold to a growing nation hungry for identity and justification. And in that sense, he's not alone. History is full of Bunyan-like figures, oversized, charming, simplified. They protect us from the complexity of truth. But truth, even when uncomfortable, is necessary, because without it, we inherit only half of the story. And worse, we begin to repeat its silences. So what do we do with Paul now? Tear down the statues? Rewrite the books? Maybe not. Maybe the answer isn't to erase him, but to see him clearly, to look up at that towering figure and say, we know what you are. We know who you were meant to hide. In doing so, we don't destroy the myth, we free it. We let it evolve. We let it tell the whole truth, not just the part that fits. Because in the end, every tale leaves a trace. And perhaps the most powerful stories are the ones that, once unmasked, make us question not the storyteller, but ourselves. If this story made you rethink what legends really mean, don't stop here. Subscribe for more stories that peel back the myth to reveal the truth. Hit the like button. Share your thoughts in the comments and help us grow this journey of rediscovery. Want to go deeper? Become a channel member and support our work in uncovering the forgotten voices and hidden truths behind the tales we thought we knew. More revelations are on the way. Don't miss the next one.